So, good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and we are in Greenwich Mean Time still for a little while yet. And welcome. Welcome to a live stream, or welcome to the recording of the live stream if you're listening to it later. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the fulfillment, I think, of a prophetic word that was given to Tom Bloomer, my guess would be about 5 years ago. And the word was that we were entering a season of pruning. And he asked me if I would endorse that. And I didn't have a particular revelation about that, and I was hesitant to endorse it, partly because of the nature of it, saying, okay, we're going through a winter time, because that's when you prune, and we're going through a time where some things that have been part of the tree get cut off. And the word was, the Lord is pruning you so that you could be much, much more fruitful. Now, I grew up on a farm. It was a fruit farm, amongst other things. We had a lot of it was not a big farm, 30 acres or so, and irrigated, and we had cherry trees and apple trees and pear trees and peaches and just a range of apricots, range of fruits. And that was nice, but it was a lot of work. And probably the hardest work was pruning in the winter, because it was in the winter and it was cold, and you're out there pruning a couple hundred trees. Very time consuming. Don't know how my dad managed to do all that he did, but part of the way he managed to do it was to get me to help with the pruning. And so I know what it was like. And if you didn't prune, the trees would go all to growth of new wood, but less and less fruit. And that we have some trees around here at Highfield Oval that haven't been pruned properly most years in the last 40 years. So they got tangled branches, and it's a bit of a mess. I remember the pear trees, and in Colorado, in Grand Junction, where I grew up, the pear trees every summer, as they were beginning to bear fruit, they would also put out these new shoots going straight up and through the summer, and then after we picked all the pears in the autumn, these new growth branches that would go straight up might grow up to 3 meters high of new growth, and we would cut all those off and clear out the middle of the tree and so on every winter. And if you didn't, then the fruit got less and less and of poorer and poorer quality. So Tom's word was that we were entering into this season where, this especially applies to grapevines, where you cut right back, that we were going into this pruning season. And I remember when we came out of COVID, so I can't remember exactly how long ago Tom gave that initial word, but when we came out of the governmental restrictions placed on us during COVID, and I communicated with Tom again. I said, well, the good thing is we must be about 2 years into this 7-year period that he said was coming. And he said, no, it's starting about now. So I would assume that we're maybe 4 years into this period of pruning, if that's an accurate word, or if the number 7 is symbolic, and maybe it is. But we've been being pruned. So the title of what I'm talking about today is What is Being Pruned? And I can't talk to you about everything that's being pruned, but I do know that those expressions of ministry called YWAM that are not growing, are small, and have remained small for years. I see quite a few of those being pruned off, because if they're in a given city or town and there's just, say, a couple or one family, and they don't grow anymore, the tendency is to accept unfruitfulness. I'm not saying growth in numbers is the only kind of sign of vitality that there is, but we are called to work in teams. we are body people, as in 1 Corinthians 12. And if we don't fill out to be a body with the different giftings and callings and skills, then we don't really represent a team ministry. So teams with just one or two people that have existed that way for quite some time and have settled into that and accepted that, they're likely to be pruned. Now, I'm not against people pioneering with just one or two people. Marty and I came to England with just the two of us, and we joined with Rihanna Peterson-Jolie for a little while, but then she moved on. It was just the two of us. But it started growing within the first couple of months and went on growing consistently ever since. So growth, that which is not growing, is likely to be pruned. But I see some really painful pruning where what's being pruned is a kind of leadership which is not really a Christ-like leadership. And that's what I really want to talk to you about today. It's a painful thing to talk about because I've been involved in some instances in the last few years and right up until now where there are ministries that have been part of YWAM for quite a long time, but their approach to leadership especially is not what we're called to be. I had the great privilege of being quite close to Lauren and Darlene over the years, still close to Darlene. I've seen her in the last week or two, and talked to her quite a bit, and have Zoom calls with her, which I really enjoy. And I'm glad to report as of today that her energy levels are back and her sharpness is back, and I'm just really thrilled. I can't say that without thinking, now this is not the Biden administration where I'm putting a positive spin on something that's not really there. But I was really thrilled to be around Dar for a few days, a couple weeks ago, and staying at her guest room and see that she's really engaged with all the issues. Again, some of the health problems that had dogged her as she was caring for Lauren and following that, because it was such a self-sacrificing period for both of them, that she's now back to good energy levels and much wisdom and much to contribute still into our ministry. So one of the things that we are experiencing now is pruning of leadership styles that are just not compatible with what Lauren and Dar modeled and what is biblical. Let me give you a couple of examples. Lauren, some people say, well, Lauren didn't correct his followers very well. Oh, he did. He did. It's just that I know that he really trusted God to work in people's lives, and he did not consider that he was God and that he needed to do all the work to see people change. But when he knew that it was right to say something, he didn't hesitate to bring correction. And I was sometimes on the receiving end of it. But one of the things I really appreciated about Lauren, and Dar now too, is that you could disagree with him, and he did not exact any kind of punishment on you if you disagreed. I thought, well, maybe you're right, because he really believed, and she believes, in the priesthood of all believers. So there's this thing that we often take for granted in some of the more Western developed cultures, that the individual is highly valued wherever there are human beings. No, very often the individual is used up for the sake of the tribe or the whole or the club or the extended family or whatever it may be. But in those situations where the individual is not prized, but the leadership structure is one of power, a hierarchy of power, with one person or maybe a couple or a family at the top, the individual is often not prized at all. Let me give you an example. In the 1970s, we were having a major international outreach. I had been at the first one, the big one in Munich, and had taken a responsible role there, even though I was quite young. I didn't lead real well, but I was given leadership. And another big outreach came along like that. And Marty and I felt quite clearly that we were not supposed to be at that one. We were supposed to be with our children and their grandparents and some cousins and all. And we were to be strengthening the family ties over that summer. And as the outreach was approaching and the leadership teams had gathered, I got a phone call from Lauren, and he said, Lynn, been praying with Joy Dawson, and we really feel like you're supposed to be here. Would you please pray about it? And I said, yes, and got back to him and said, no, I don't think so. A few days later, he phoned again. A couple days later, he phoned again and said, Lynn, we really feel like you're supposed to be here. And I said, well, Lauren, we've got a really clear sense that the Lord wants us here. We're settled and peaceful about that. And I don't think I'm supposed to be away from my family right now. I've been traveling quite a lot, and that was putting Marty under pressure. It was leaving her with a lot of time-consuming work with the children, and children need to be raised by two parents whenever ever possible. And I wasn't there enough, so I thought, well, I can't really leave. And we wouldn't have felt at all at peace about me taking off. And so he just said, okay. And that was the end of that. And he never came back to me. He never charged me with rebellion. He never indicated, I never ever saw him indicate even once that his guidance trumped my guidance, that he heard from God more clearly than I do. Although I'm sure that was true all his life. He heard from God in a remarkable way. But he realized that you don't get guidance for other people that overrules what they are comfortable with, what they are committed to do. You don't get people to do things that they don't want to do by using the word of the Lord to people. Because God himself, you read the scriptures and you see how much he respects the freedom of the individual to make their decisions, and he will give them warnings about what's wrong and tell them about the right path, but in the end he wants us to freely obey him and do what he says without any coercive power. So, and Lauren is very much that way, and I really value that. Now, that's not the normal way that leadership in business, or often in the family, or in education works, because there's somebody in every given setting that's at the top of the power hierarchy, and what they say goes, like the teacher in the classroom. So we spend the great majority of our lives, certainly in the first 18, 19, 20 years, in hierarchies. First of all, it's where our parents have a lot more say than we do when we're just infants and toddlers and so on, and rightly so. Then education system, and then there's the law, and even as children, the law has a certain amount of power. I know my sister and I were, you might find this hard to believe, but we were a little bit naughty, and we used to really enjoy going over to an elderly woman's house, only one house removed from us, and her front yard was a little bit higher than the others down towards us, and we could put rocks into the irrigation ditch there, and the ditch would overflow, and it would flood the first neighbor and then into our yard, and we could kick around in the water. And because we were only, I think, 2 and 4, or maybe 3 and 5, we didn't get the implications of that. We just somehow kind of knew it was naughty, until finally she called the police on us. And I don't know how we knew, but somehow we really knew that the police had authority over us. Because when a motorcycle policeman turned up to tell us off and threaten us with jail, I think my mother was complicit in that whole process. Then we really knew never, ever, ever to throw rocks in that ditch again, and we didn't. So we're used to having these power structures. And of course, in many, many cases, the church has been that way too. So the higher up some hierarchy you go, the more authority they have, and the higher up ones overrule the next one's down, and the next one's down, and so on. Or maybe you're in just a local hierarchy where the word of the pastor is the final word, and he's accountable to no one. And I think, some of us were raised in those kinds of churches, and we often look at the Catholic Church and we think, oh, that hierarchy thing, right up to the Pope, that's terrible. But sometimes it's better than having nobody above the local pastor who can go quite AWOL and there's no protection. I'm not really recommending either one of those because neither of those is biblical. But where I'll come back to that in a minute, but where YWAM leadership have an implicit or explicit hierarchy where there's a person or some people at the top, a family or something that has the final word, and their guidance always overrules guidance of people who are beneath them in their structure. That's not our calling. That's not the leadership that the Bible teaches. I think throughout the Gospels and the epistles, it's very clear that leaders are supposed to do what it says in 1 Peter 5:5, where it says, "Let each of you, all of you, clothe yourselves with humility towards one another." Now that's just after Peter is saying about the elders caring for God's people without grumbling or complaining or without considering it to be a heavy load, but loving and loving them. And he talks to the people about obeying their leaders. It's the only place in the New Testament it says obey your leaders. All the rest of it is submit to, which is an attitude. Obedience is an action. And yet it's in the context here of all of you humbling yourselves, clothing yourselves with humility towards one another. And that's what I saw with Lauren then, and I saw it on other occasions. There was more than one time when Lauren had a sense of I was to do something that I said no to. And that did not strain or break our relationship at all. He trusted me and the others around in the early days, and ever since then, he's always trusted other people to hear from God, unless they are really damaging other people and there's something that's really sinful about what they're doing, then yes, correction. But if it's a matter of thinking God's telling me to do this and he's feeling I think the Lord wants you to do that, then he would never, ever force that on us. So what am I saying? Well, I'm illustrating something that is a part of our calling, and I think it's just the calling of the whole body of Christ. And I think that in our Western nations, well, in our more developed nations, where there are denominations and local churches with power hierarchies, and there's a super celebrity pastor at the top or denominational head at the top, man, there's an extraordinarily high failure rate amongst people like that, because that's not really the biblical pattern for leadership. And so that pattern is being pruned from Youth with a Mission and from the body of Christ more widely, because people are waking up and saying, wait a minute, why are so many really well-known ministries experiencing failure in their senior leader and their founder? I was listening to a message just yesterday or the day before from a man who was speaking to some YWAMers, but he was from a different ministry where the very high-profile, very well-known leader had just had a major moral failure, and the whole ministry was crumbling. And he talked about how broken he was, and everybody was, and he said, you are so blessed to have had a founder who finished well, and we really are. Not a cause for pride in any way whatsoever, but gratitude that we did not have a celebrity leader who made himself exceptional, even though he was an exceptionally gifted person. a remarkable man. And so is Darlene Still, a remarkable woman. They never lorded it over us. And that's what Jesus said to his disciples. He said, you know how it is with the Gentiles, how they lord it over their people. It's not going to be so amongst you. Whoever wants to be a leader or first amongst a group should be the servant of all. And that's hard to do. That's really demanding. But that's our calling. So I think, as far as I can see, because I've been involved in quite a few instances, very painful recently, where leaders who tended to lord it over others either have been getting the breakthrough of revelation and humbling themselves and repenting, or they are leaving YWAM, or in a couple of cases, very sad cases, the name of YWAM has had to be withdrawn from them because we just don't want people coming to Youth with a Mission and experiencing harsh, domineering leadership. It's just too damaging. You know, authority plays such a role in our lives. Was it designed to be that way? I don't know. I really don't. I think, yes, probably, because there seems to have been hierarchy amongst the angels who preceded us in God's overall creation. And there's a kind of a hierarchy of responsibility and authority even in the Godhead. If the words of Jesus reflect the Godhead in eternity, in the age to come, then he yields to the Father, and the Father also clothes himself with humility towards the Son. But is there a hierarchy? Different responsibilities, at least, different functions, at least. So, and yet there's no doubt that when sin came into the world, then the hierarchy became a powerful pyramid of authority that can be really damaging. And that's why we are commanded to clothe ourselves with humility towards one another, because a gifted, capable leader who also walks in great humility is such a blessing. Moses, it says, was meek above all men on the face of the earth. And that's why I'm increasingly advocating and trying to play a role in team leadership. Really, body leadership is a better word, but that's not used very much. So I'll use team leadership and then explain what I mean about body. See, we're so used to thinking, so who has the final word around here? And I don't think that applies to us. Because Jesus is really the head of the church, and the more any individual insert themselves into a role of mediating the Word of God or having a more clear hotline to heaven than I do, and they're above me, and their word carries more weight, then Jesus is not so much the head of the church. We believe in the priesthood of all believers, which translates into saying we believe that anybody and everybody can hear from God. We believe that the newest YWAM person can hear from the Lord directly, and that they might have a word for all of us. You don't know through whom the word will come that impacts each of us. There are many, many instances of people who don't have any particular authority or leadership role have come out with something that ends up being recognized as a key word from God for us. So we are called to body leadership and team leadership. And what I mean by that is, well, it goes back to, how am I doing on time? Yeah, I can say this. It goes back to the message that Lauren brought us after an intensive time, 11 days, I think, of prayer and fasting, when he came to a meeting we had in China, and shared with us what's called the tripod message. If you go and do a search for apostolic, I think, or spiritual eldership is the best search on YWAM.org. You come up with that message. It's really, really important. At the time that he gave it, I didn't think it would be as important as it has become. But as time has gone on, it's one of those words where you think, oh man, that really applies to this situation, applies to that situation, applies to another one. And the message was that everybody hears from God, priesthood of all believers, and the respect for that. And then also elders in the midst of them, and then the cultivating and maintaining of close relationships with others, staying in the body in a healthy manner. That's the key to us, the YWAM part of the body of Christ, continuing to grow and do what he's called us to do and be who he's called us to be. But that's true for every part of the body of Christ. So we had a teaching on eldership then 5 years later that really hit the nail on the head. And we realized, okay, we're supposed to be doing some changes. And at the end of a prayer time and a teaching series of 4 sessions, one of our guys had a picture as we prayed, and he said, I saw like a great plain or prairie, like full of people. And then I saw there was a platform in the midst of it, and there was a person on the platform. And then other people climbed up or were pulled up onto the platform, and then there was another platform, and same thing happened, one, and then more and more, and more platforms right throughout the plane, more and more and more. And I thought that really represented the fact that we're all on the same plane. But leadership emerges, and oftentimes it starts with a person. You know, somebody pioneers something. They're the apostolic initiator of something, and then as soon as possible, other people are drawn onto or climb onto the platform of leadership, and they become a body. And it sort of dawned on me that God is a God of the same kind of structure at many different levels. That means he's fractal. And I think when you use the word fractal, I didn't know what it meant for quite a long time. And then I realized, okay, I looked up the meaning. I thought the best way I picture it is, you know, there's pictures of atoms that when scientists first began to identify what an atom was, they have a nucleus and they have the electrons and the protons, the electrons spinning around it, and the protons and the neutrons, and that looks like, or the solar system looks like that, and then galaxies, and then apparently there are different clusters of galaxies. Goodness gracious! But the smaller you go, the more that there's that kind of particles around a central mass, like our Earth goes around the sun. That seems to be a fractal pattern. Well, I think the 1 Corinthians 12 imagery of the body with many different members and all doing what they're called to do and all honoring one another and protecting one another and respecting each other is what the body should be. And that applies to leadership teams as well. We still have quite a strong tendency to say, okay, you've got a team of leaders there, but who's the leader of the leaders? Well, I don't think it's like that. I think if you read especially the book of Acts, and you know the epistles about elders too, you find out that the leadership was always plural. And at one time, it was very clear that Peter was a spokesman. He spoke out first, and then he and James and John were kind of seniors amongst the others, but there was no the leader. You get into Acts 15, and you find it's James, the brother of Jesus, who was the elder of the church in Jerusalem, who chaired the meetings and had articulated the final decision of the group when they were trying to work out how the law did or didn't apply to the Gentiles. I really believe that in any place where there's a decent-sized community or church or whatever, there should be plural eldership, but they have different functions according to their gifts and abilities. So that's the way we're meant to function. And if we have a hierarchy of significance, I'm more significant, it's a status-filled hierarchy or power-filled hierarchy, we're missing it. And that's being pruned. Because in the end, that becomes damaging to people. And I've just read and talked to too many people reporting about deep damage being in a team or in a ministry where there was a hierarchy and the person at the top in the end was doing things they wouldn't want people to know, or they've had non-transparent financial benefits to their role. They put themselves in a different category than everybody else. And if it's not servant-hearted leadership, it doesn't work. People end up getting hurt. So that's what is being pruned. And why? We're being pruned so we can bear much more fruit. And I think there's so much evidence that more and more people are coming to Jesus. More and more people are committing to prayer. More and more people are committing to going into all the world with the gospel. More and more people are likely to come to Youth with a Mission, amongst many others. But YWAM is large and is likely, meant to be, I think, much, much larger because we're one of the easiest ways that people can get to where they're called with some training, but no prolonged, unnecessary training, no systems, just equipment as a disciple and get out and do what God's called you to do. So we want people to come to YWAM and have a very good experience with leaders who model what servant-hearted, humble, kind, gentle leadership is about. May the Lord be gracious to us. And I want to just close by saying, I'm not pruning anything. YWAM leaders are not meant to prune. The Lord prunes. And what we do is do our best to care for the whole of the body. And when something gets pruned, it's painful, and we feel the pain. At least we should do. So thanks very much for listening. And I'll be back next week, I think. I've had a few weeks away because of travels and responsibilities, but I'll be back and we'll have another live stream on another subject. So see you in a week's time, I hope.